Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Siegel. I am a journalist, writer and broadcaster who specialises in climate and nature stories. Welcome again to the Be a Net Zero Hero podcast, part of a Be the Change series of conversations organised by One Carbon World in collaboration with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, One Carbon World is a climate positive, not-for-profit organisation and an official observer organisation of the UNFCCC. They're registered in the UK and have operations in over 32 countries, offering advice and support on measuring, reducing and rebalancing the emissions of small and large organisations. COP28 will be a milestone moment when the world will take stock of its progress on the Paris Agreement. The first global stocktake will provide a comprehensive assessment of progress since adopting the Paris Agreement. This will help align efforts on climate action, including measures that need to be put in place to bridge the gaps in progress. And we know there are gaps. As every year, One Carbon World is attending the UN Summit. They have showcased inspirational stories at COP25 in Madrid, COP26 in Glasgow, and COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. They've also had the honour to measure the emissions of COP27 and issue the official COP27 verification report and COP27 sustainability report for the Egyptian government. This year, they want to show the world their journey towards net zero and would love to tell you some more inspirational stories too. So on that note, this third episode is called Net Zero Food, Drink and Logistics, a really interesting topic. Together, we're going to talk about the food and drink industries and value chains, and also the role of labelling and logistics in every step. So before we invite our first guest, we'd like to ask some questions to Steve Kenzie, Executive Director at the UN Global Compact Network UK. Steve's going to tell us more about their work around sustainable development goals and their support to businesses and organisations.
I'll start by talking about the bigger picture, the UN Global Compact. We are the largest corporate sustainability initiative globally. There's more than 23,000 participants in the initiative. It's a UN-backed corporate sustainability initiative. It started in 2000 when then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan saw the problems of globalization, where we had companies shifting production to developing countries in pursuit of lower costs, but they weren't shifting standards around working conditions and business practices along with them. And we had some real problems with children making footballs. Those of us of an age will remember those scandals. He recognized that we needed a global standard for responsible business, and he had a brilliant insight that we could draw from existing UN agreements that had already been accepted around the world. And so the UN Global Compact has as its foundation 10 universal principles that have been drawn from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. Our work is to work with our participants to help inspire greater ambition, give them skills and knowledge to enable action around that ambition, and we seek to shape the wider environment for sustainability. To join us is very simple. The CEO of the organization, however large or small, wherever it's located, just needs to make 3 commitments. Firstly, to operationalize our 10 principles throughout their organizations, to report annually on the progress that they're making towards doing so, and finally, to support the wider UN development agenda, which is best expressed right now by the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing with us your amazing work. Now, I would like to invite our first guests who will be discussing the food and drink industries and value chains. We have with us Nosheen Ghasmi, Head of Sustainability of Industrial Promotion Services, IPS. IPS, for a little bit of background, is the infrastructure and industrial development arm of the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development, part of the Aga Khan Development Network. IPS provides venture capital, technical assistance, and management support to encourage and expand businesses, particularly in countries of sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Welcome to you. We also have with us Ed Ayton, Sustainability and Ethics Advisor at Abel & Cole. Under the motto, organic, seasonal, wild food that's extra special, Abel & Cole delivers organic produce to thousands of homes in the UK, including mine. Anyway, Abel & Cole works with multiple organic producers and makes sure to keep the promise of farming and delivering sustainably to their customers. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for making the time to be here.
Thanks, Lucy. Great to be here.
Thanks, Lucy. Great to be here too.
Right, well, I've got so much to ask you, and I know you're very busy, so I'm not going to waste your time. I want to start with a general question for both of you. Food and drink is all about value chains. I think we can agree on that. So why do you think it is essential to work with your value chains when addressing your carbon footprint emissions as a business? What does that approach bring you? Ed, let's start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'd say it's essential quite simply because that's where most of the impact is. So we can deliver, as you'll probably know, with efficient rounds. We can use returnable boxes. We can insulate our warehouses. But the bulk of our impact, the emissions that we're responsible for, they come from the products that we sell, the days, the weeks, the months that it took to make them. So we're really just the tip of the iceberg. And I think the proof for that is the proportion of our scope measurements. So our scope 3, which looks at our value chain, is about 90% of our total footprint. Now, I've got to be honest, I think the term chain can be a bit misleading because it can imply that everything flows in a very linear fashion. So I think a lot of our terminology, like farm to fork, for example, traps us in this mindset that we can only influence our immediate impact. If you look at how interdependent we are with our farmers, with our customers, with our partners, that word interdependent is absolutely crucial. We're all at different stages of this journey, our reduction journeys, different levels and types of expertise. So we're all in a good place to help each other out. So we can inspire our customers. We have customers who are climate scientists. They keep us on our toes. We are helping our farmers decarbonize. And likewise, we have farmers who are soil experts. So you can see the expertise and the efforts go in all different directions. And I think that makes a much more robust and resilient system.
I love it. I love the iconoclastic chucking away of the word chain. Would you prefer value web? Would that be better?
Yeah, I think like food chains and now food webs, I think web's a much more appropriate term to use, definitely.
Okay, good. I'm all up for chucking out stuff that doesn't work and bringing in stuff that does. Nosheen, let's get your thoughts on the importance of working with value chains, stroke webs, stroke any other shape that you would like to put in here.
So yeah, thanks, Lucy. So to truly make meaningful progress in addressing climate change, we need to appreciate and accept that our impact as a business extends beyond our manufacturing facilities. So when we did our greenhouse gas emission baseline assessment in 2021, and we evaluated our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, focusing more on our upstream activities and our value chains, value webs, what we found with regards to our agro industries in East Africa was that about 86% of our total emissions were actually scope 3 emissions. And of these emissions, over 75% stemmed from the purchase of agricultural raw material for these food and beverage industries in the group. So the outcome of this exercise was really a stark realization towards accepting our responsibility to proactively identify ways to support the mitigation of these emissions. More critically, we knew that we needed to continue to work with our farmers, who are key stakeholders, to co-develop tailored solutions to enable them not only to produce raw material more sustainably, but also to find ways to help them to adapt and become more resilient to the changing climate. This is critical for us to secure our raw material supply for the future. And then throughout this process, we also realized that we could identify opportunities to inset or rebalance our residual emissions within these value chains. But at the end of the day, to make that meaningful impact, we really need collective action. And therefore, as businesses, it's really important that we mobilize and engage our stakeholders across our value chain to continue to collaborate and equally contribute towards making transformational change.
Fantastic. There's a lot to get into there. Let's before I've got some questions for both of you, just a little clarification, because Nosheen, I hear the word inset all the time. Do you have a little short explainer for me?
So basically, insetting is rebalancing those emissions post decarbonization, and doing so within your value chain. So it's often covering your scope 3 emissions. And that could take, for example, the form of any form of, let's say, nature-based solution like agroforestry or biochar implementation within your soils, etc.
Thank you so much for that. Every day is a school day for me. Thank you. That was a very clear explainer. Now, I have some questions for each of you, and I want to drill down a little bit. So let's start with IPS. Nosheen, back to you. What is your vision of sustainable development, and why is it important to support sustainable development goals when it comes to food and drink production and value chains?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as a purpose-driven organization, my vision for sustainable development in relation to IPS is to continue to grow our companies in a manner where we improve the quality of life of the communities we work with over the long term, where we maintain our role as responsible stewards of the environment, living within planetary boundaries, and ultimately making sure that the needs of the current generation are met without compromising the needs of the future generations. Now, with regards to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we appreciate that these goals are interrelated, and we try as much as possible to integrate that within our business strategies. Now, in light of the growing global population, supporting these UN Sustainable Development Goals in the food and drink value chains is absolutely critical, and especially in ensuring that our global food systems are more productive as well as more resilient, that they can deliver healthy food, contributing to better nutrition and overall being for our consumers in a way that's accessible, affordable, and safe. And also that these food systems are more inclusive, so that they engage those that are often most vulnerable and marginalized. So ultimately doing it in a way that's a lot more just and equitable. And ultimately, overall, it's all done in a way that is more environmentally sustainable, where we minimize food losses and other forms of waste. We optimize the use of the finite natural resources that we're blessed with. And of course, not forgetting to protect and really preserve our biodiversity.
Thank you. A big question and a big answer with lots of vision in there. Very, very interesting. Ed, could you tell us more about the different initiatives Abel and Cole have pushed forward in the last few years to reduce its carbon and plastic footprint?
Yeah, certainly. So if we first look at carbon, so firstly, the bulk of our range continues to be certified organic. And the big carbon saving there is that there are no synthetic fertilizers being used. And that's a gun that we're sticking to, along with working on rounds over delivery slots and not selling anything that's been air freighted as well. So those are really important policies of ours. In the last few years, we've signed up to the Clean Van commitment. So we'll be zero emissions in city centres in the next 2 years. As you can appreciate, turning our entire fleet electric has met a few obstacles. Availability of vans, for example, or charging infrastructure has yet to be fully developed. So in the meantime, and we're always looking at what we can do in the meantime, we're using alternatives to fossil fuels like hydrotreated vegetable oil. But I hasten to add that these are temporary measures. We've also made lots of small switches around the sites. So things like insulated roller doors on the fridges, air source heat pumps for the office spaces, new technology for the drivers to map more efficient rounds with. Now, by some estimates, up to half of the emissions from our food and drink around the world comes from the waste that system produces. So we've got our own dedicated food guardian. A big shout to Anya, who does a sterling job finding a good home for anything that we can't pack in our boxes. So that's a bit about our carbon reductions. If we look at our plastic footprint, So lots on the go here. So firstly, we're phasing out compostable plastics from our range because they do not behave as advertised most of the time. Authorities don't collect them, so they rarely end up in the right place. We also find that most customers don't have healthy compost heaps. I have 4, and even I've mulched my garden in little bits of plastic. So I do have to caveat, if any of the infrastructure improves, if any of the above changes, then we may change our tune. But for the time being, compostables are out. In the meantime, we're following our packaging hierarchy, which is to remove it where we can, implement refills where we need to, and then recyclable materials if really needed. Obviously, delivering to our customers regularly offers a huge advantage with these because we can collect the packaging, and that opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities. So 2 of my favorites, for example, so we have our organic refills on delivery, possibly a UK first. We don't know if we can claim that one yet. That's called Club Zero. We've got a very exciting announcement coming up that I can't let the cat out of the bag too soon, but watch this space. But that is a project that goes from strength to strength, and the saving on single-use plastics is significant. And then we also have our plastic pickup project as well. This is where we collect all the films of flexible plastics that our customers would otherwise have to take to a big supermarket to recycle with questionable ends. But with our partners, we collect those materials and turn them into ground sheets and building materials. So you'd think that all of the above would be enough, but as we all know, there are always stones to keep turning.
Thank you. Very impressive. Are you sure? I want to give you the opportunity to give us the exclusive on the new announcement. He's not going to take it.
I'm strictly under embargo. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Never mind. Big shout out to Anya, and also interesting to hear about your 4 compost heaps. What really strikes me, not only the amount of initiatives and where you are stepping in when you see a problem with a solution, but how sort of fleet of foot you need to be and how you need to keep up to date on a conversation that's changing all the time, especially on packaging, EV charging, all of that stuff. So it's just really great to hear and very inspiring to hear how you guys pivot so quickly when the context changes. Thank you so much. And we're going to be following all your initiatives and listening out for new announcements, I can tell you. Thank you. We're now going to listen to more organisations who are already making a difference, some more inspirational stories. Listen to this and we'll be back in a minute.
Soprasteria, a leader in European digital services, has been recognized with a certification by the Institute for Sustainable IT. As part of this certification, Soprasteria is making more than 60 commitments through an ambitious action plan for continuous improvement. For example, we are extending our laptop's life expectancy. Our actions don't stop here. Driven by our employees network, Soprasteria seeks to make our entire value chain to become a more responsible digital environment in support of a sustainable world for all.
Okay, let's now move on to the second part of this episode. In this part, we will look at how food value chains are collaborating to achieve net zero. It's no secret that Scope 3 emissions, so those that sit upstream and downstream of an organisation, are the most difficult to measure and manage and cannot be solved by any individual actor, i.e. they require a collaborative effort across the value chain, which itself presents challenges from a data sharing and accounting perspective. So let's really get to grips with that. To share the latest developments in this space, I'd like to welcome Jason Barrett, CEO and founder of Mondra, an AI-driven tech platform that allows food companies to measure and manage the environmental impact of their food products from farm to fork as a means to reducing overall Scope 3 emissions. Hello, Jason. Nice to have you with us. Hi, just waving at you. Waving back. Okay, Jason is joined today by Lucinda Langton, who is Head of Sustainability at Marks and Spencer and founding partner of an industry coalition in the UK that is leading the way in net zero value chains. Hello to you, Lucinda, also waving to you. Very nice to have you with us. And Jason and Lucinda are both joined by David Kennedy, former Director General for Food, Biosecurity and Trade at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and the founding Chief Exec for the Committee on Climate Change. Wow, a warm welcome to all three of you. Many thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us, Lucy.
Thank you. Okay, let's get going because I've got so many questions for you. Jason, can we start with you? I understand that Mondra works with 80% of UK grocery retailers to reduce Scope 3 emissions and deliver environmentally competitive products to market. I hope that's right. That's an enormous percentage, isn't it? Can you explain why product footprinting at scale is the key to meeting the Scope 3 challenge in the food and drink sector? How does that align?
Yes, thank you, Lucy. So what we do know is that the UK has a legislative requirement to hit net zero by 2050. And if you look at UK grocery, that target is 2040 for so many who've pledged to get there under the British Retail Consortium's net zero roadmap. Now, the biggest challenge they all have, and we heard Ed from Abel and Cole speaking of this before, is their Scope 3 emissions, those that sit upstream or downstream. And the reason why they're so difficult to measure and manage is because the data that you need in order to truly understand them is typically unavailable, unknown, just really difficult to acquire it. So this is where product footprinting, tech-enabled product footprinting can really accelerate progress. You might be familiar with an acronym LCA, or life cycle assessment. So this is the method of measuring not only carbon, but the full environmental impacts of a food product all the way through the supply chain, from farm through to distribution, processing and packaging, and even retailing a product. So if you can LCA, or product footprint, every one of your products, then what that gives you is a really high resolution view of the majority of your Scope 3 footprint. And with that high resolution view, you're able to prioritize investment, really target action, hotspots and quick wins, and crucially, collaborate with your suppliers at a product level to innovate and decarbonize your supply chain.
Fascinating. Honestly, there are weeks when life cycle assessment, LCAs, are all I talk about and hear about. You wouldn't believe, it's sort of tragic, but also I'm a little bit obsessed. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Now, Lucinda, M&S have long been at the forefront of the sustainability agenda in grocery retail. Sometimes it feels like they invented it here, to be completely honest. Now, I understand that as a business, you have some ambitious decarbonisation targets, including Scope 3 emissions. Do you agree with Jason that product footprinting, or LCA, is the key to achieving Scope 3 targets?
Hi, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think product footprinting at scale is one of the very key tools for us that we will use to achieve net zero. And at M&S, we've set a target to achieve net zero across our business by 2040, so across our value chain, so 10 years ahead of government. And as Jason was saying, around 94% of our emissions sit in Scope 3. So it's really important that we have a much more granular understanding of what our supply chain footprint is really coming from. And the way I see it as well is that every single product on our shelves, this is what net zero really means for us, and really what I've got to do is to make sure that every single product on our shelves by 2040 has net zero emissions associated with it. But at the moment, I can only really measure top down. We know we sell X amount of meat, for example, and we apply that to a standard emissions factor. We know we sell X amount of mangoes, and we apply a standard emissions factor. What I can't know is the exact detail of exactly every product and how it's made. So we know, for example, looking top down, that 70% of our emissions come from agriculture. But I think to really drive change, and importantly, to be able to measure the changes that we then start to make in our value chain as we work with our farmers and our growers, we need to start measuring bottom up. So what Mondra, I think, brings to us is what's really exciting about it. Working together, we can start to footprint each of those products on our shelves quickly, almost at a push of a button, using our recipe tree data, which gives us in turn a much more accurate view of our product footprint, and then aggregated a much more granular view of our entire carbon footprint across our business. And what's the double whammy here for me, the most exciting part, is I can then start to make that information available to our commercial product developers and to our buyers and others who, empowered by that knowledge about where the carbon sits in their product, they can then start to think about how they can reduce that over time. So the potential is huge for this work.
Really interesting. I'm also really interested in how you present that information to the other constituencies that you just referenced. Are they sort of waiting for it, or do you have to sort of sell it to them?
Some are waiting for it. And I think, yeah, we have had some really interesting conversations, and I'm hoping that the good thing about Mondra as well is this is an interface. It will allow them to be able to visualize the footprints of different products and to model in when we get the product integrated into the system. And Jason, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I think the idea is that they can then start to play around and say, well, if I change that mayonnaise for a different type of mayonnaise, or if I move my chicken supplier from this supplier to that supplier, then actually the carbon footprint of that sandwich could come down by 10%. And that's the sort of knowledge is power that I think it could drive for us. So yeah, they're clamoring for some of this information.
Great. And it's good to hear that. Okay, Jason, well, let's come to you because, you know, LCAs in the past, we've had organizations say that they're going to do, you know, thousands of lines and footprint them. And then there's been challenges and sometimes they've been dropped. There is with that level of data capture, there are challenges, aren't there? What would you say are the key challenges with LCA at scale, and how are you addressing them? And it sounds like there's been a breakthrough of sorts, but yeah, just give us a sense of where you are.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. Fundamentally, this is a massive data challenge. And I think some of the examples you allude to are, you know, leading retailer in UK back in 2009 set out to LCA, I think it was 50,000 products, but doing it manually, doing it with an army of consultants. And after 3 years, stood the project down because they worked out it was going to take a century to complete the job. And of course, other than being prohibitively time consuming and costly, by the time you get even a handful of years down the road, it's out of date. And so the old manual way of doing LCA it just doesn't deliver what we need in terms of some of those use cases Lucinda was pointing to, operationalizing carbon accounting in the business, providing dynamic LCA insights to those that need them in the business so that they can innovate with their suppliers. So we do need to tackle this challenge. And of course, it's technology to the rescue. It's digital innovation that helps us to do more with this data challenge. I mean, we are fundamentally automating life cycle assessment. So we can take that job, which once took 100 years, and even with the same volume of products, do it in sub 4 hours. So that is a staggering improvement, of course, but just being able to automate reporting is, I guess, the foundation. Automating LCA footprinting is the foundation. Where this gets really interesting is then when you're able to collaborate and share that data upstream in your supply chain so that everybody's working to the same data set and can collaborate on a single platform to not only share data, but to make product improvements and see those improvements cascade dynamically downstream. So yes, technology approaches to managing and processing data have come a long way in the last decade. But I think the other major challenge that the industry faces is a lack of standardization. It's all very well getting the data, but the way that you do LCA, the rules, if you like, are just not prescriptive enough, which means the way that I do footprinting could be different to the way that you do footprinting. And of course, that undermines progress. It means that comparability isn't there and the ability to compete isn't there. So we do need standardization. And so to achieve that, we have brought a coalition of the willing together with the British Retail Consortium and working in consultation with government agencies and NGOs to really agree the rules of the game and scale them out on Mondra's tech platform.
And what's the timeline on that?
Well, I think it's an ongoing endeavor. We are, right now we are in the final stages of the first year of implementation. So we have 7 UK retailers rolling out the platform for the sector at large. But of course, I think the timelines you're referring to, it's not just the industry here. We do need government support. Yes, we've seen a lot of activity in that space. And I suspect David will be sharing where we're at from a policy perspective in just a moment.
Yes, great. Almost seamlessly flowing on to David, but thank you, Jason, especially for updating my knowledge on LCAs since 2009, where things have changed from 100 years to 4 hours. So that is quite a big leap forward. Yes, indeed. So Jason just touched on standardization of footprinting rules. I pressed him for a timeline, and he very diplomatically deferred to something that the government should be leading on, which brings us very nicely to David. David, over to you.
Hi, Lucy. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so look, let me give you a government perspective. The food system is so important in the context of broader efforts to tackle climate change, because at the global level, it accounts for 30% of total emissions or more. Now, that's a real challenge, and addressing that challenge requires a decarbonisation strategy. And if we look at the components of emissions in the food system, what are they? I think we've already heard from Lucinda, agriculture is a big part of it. Land use change is a big part of it. But it's also electricity and heat and packaging and transport. Now, as Jason has said, the starting point for any decarbonisation strategy has to be an understanding of what is the carbon footprint in total, and what is it in its component parts. And that's where we set up something called the Food Data Transparency Partnership to try to get consistency here. Now, consistency is key. And if you look at the market at the moment, there are many different tools in the food sector, in different parts of the food sector in the UK and other countries. And if you use those different tools, you get very different estimates for the same product of what's the footprint. And we need to do something about that. It can't be the case that a company who wants to show it's doing good stuff simply hires the tool provider with the lowest carbon footprint for them. So we want something that accurately represents carbon footprints. We were asked by industry to play a convening role in that respect. So could we find a common approach to measuring carbon footprints? Could we find a common methodology, common data systems? And then that could be used for purposes of company level reporting, and it could be used for product level reporting. Now, that started a few months ago. We're making very good progress, and the intention is that we will have that common methodology, common data systems, which form the basis of data transparency and the basis for decarbonisation of the food sector as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So promising to hear these parts of the jigsaw components, as David referred to them, come together in this way. My takeaway, be accurate or go home. That's my takeaway from that. So we really seem to be kind of edging forward here. We've got this prescriptive set of rules for product footprinting and Scope 3 accounting. We've got these tech innovations to scale those rules across the food and drink sector. So it's the potential really to change the game in meeting these Scope 3 challenges. Tell me now, how is this approach being implemented in the UK grocery retail market, and with what results? Jason, let's come to you on this.
Thank you, Lucy. So as mentioned before, it really is the British Retail Consortium that has been the kind of the umbrella organisation to bring all of this together as part of their net zero roadmap. So one of the pathways on that roadmap is data-driven decarbonisation. How do we do better with the data challenge? How do we not only get that data, but measure the quality of that data? There's been a long-standing debate around, is it primary or is it secondary data? How do we move away from using these big old databases with outdated proxies and get much more supply chain specific in how we're measuring things? And I think, one of the key results of the last year is that we have implemented a data quality framework for measuring just how good data is. Very much the evolution of work that WRAP have been delivering in that space. And so we've digitized it. So not only are we collecting data from supply chains in an automated fashion, but we're measuring just how good it is, recognizing that it will never be perfect. And we can't wait for perfect. We have to make a start. So I take your point, get accurate or go home. But I would say that accuracy is an ongoing endeavor. And so as we're measuring the accuracy as we move forward, we can make informed decisions that don't send us down the wrong path. So yes, we set up the coalition and we have 7 of the UK's largest retailers and some of the more specialist retailers, including Abel and Cole and other brand owners, coming together to agree the rules of the footprinting system, very much being informed by, whilst informing the inbound policy that David spoke to with the Food Data Transparency Partnership. And by this time next year, so as we're heading into summer of next year, we will have digitally twinned 100,000 product supply chains. What that means is that we will have not only footprints, but the means for suppliers in those supply chains to be able to know their performance, improve their performance, and communicate it downstream. And it's this connectivity, coming back to the supply web that we spoke of before, it's this connectivity that will really allow us to accelerate progress and the whole Scope 3 agenda.
I mean, that sounds like a very good day at the office. This sounds like a lot of breakthrough moments to me. Okay, Lucinda, what's your take on where we are and what will be achieved?
I think really just to echo what Jason said, I mean, we're obviously a member of the coalition, a founding member. And I think that for me, the really exciting element of this work is that we are coming together as an industry, alongside our industry partners, alongside our competitors, putting that aside, working obviously retailers, suppliers, NGOs and trade associations all together in this coalition to pull together against a really clear objective. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's been very successful so far. We all know what we're working towards and why. And in doing so, we are creating that level playing field and agreeing a set of standards. So there isn't that, as you say, I can do an LCA, but I've got different rules from you and you use different rules. So we're now going to spend a long time arguing over whose is the right one. This is the right set of standards. We're coming across the supply chain. And then ultimately that will just drive efficiency and effectiveness in the way we work together on this. And ultimately, I think, although we're not quite there yet, help us to all ensure that we communicate data that's been calculated in the same way over time. So I think really exciting and really effective.
Well, thank you. It's super encouraging. And I think there's some lessons there for other industries, perhaps. It's great to hear that UK retailers and their suppliers are coming together in this way to agree the standards while we wait for mandatory rules to land from DEFRA. So David, back to you. You spoke earlier about DEFRA's initiative to standardise the rule set for product footprinting in food. Overall, though, where would you say the UK is at in its policy agenda for decarbonising the food system?
So Lucy, I'd say we are pretty good in terms of ambition, and that reflects the economy as a whole, actually. So we've got ambitious carbon budgets and targets for the UK. And then within the food system, we've got widespread commitment to, for example, science-based targets initiative and net zero on ambitious timeframes there. I think we've made good progress on footprinting, as we've heard on this call, although there's a bit more to do. In terms of action, so let's give you a high-level canter through. Agriculture, which dominates food system emissions, is difficult to bring the carbon footprint down. It's difficult because if you put fertilizer on soil, on grass, whether it's synthetic or organic, that causes greenhouse gas emissions. You can't get away from that. Equally, ruminant animals, so cattle and sheep and lambs, they produce significant amounts of methane. Can't get away from that. There are lots of things we can do, and we're getting on with them. So regenerative farming, particularly in England, is paid for, a set of farming practices by the government, and there is a good response from the farming industry. Land use change is a big aspect of it. So, for example, cutting down rainforests to produce soya, to put that soya into protein, whether it's chickens or beef or whatever. There are protections that are being put in place here in the UK and in Europe and elsewhere for those land use considerations. Electricity as we go further down the supply chain is a big part of it. Electricity sector decarbonisation is a huge success story in the UK. So we have large amounts of renewable electricity. Renewable heat, there's much more scope for that. It remains a really big challenge for the food system and the economy. Packaging, we have good solutions for. It's all about recycling. And then distribution, which is about electric vehicles. There are some challenges for HGVs because we can't run HGVs on electric at the moment. What are we going to do? But for the smaller vehicles, making decent progress there as well. So ambition is there. Measurement, we're making very good progress. Action, it's the time for action. We have made some good progress, but a load left to do. And that's a partnership between government and industry to drive the food system forward.
Thank you. And thank you for breaking it down in that very clear way. Another question for you. To what extent is the UK considering similar initiatives to standardise product footprinting rules being developed in Europe? So as the UK's nearest trading partner, it would make sense to have one system for UK and Europe. Is that the direction of travel here?
I think there's two questions there, Lucy. So the point of the Food Data Transparency Partnership is get common methodologies, get common data systems, and that will allow both company level reporting and product level reporting. Now, you could mandate that in legislation, and that certainly is an option for the future. I think it probably won't happen this side of an election, which is due in the next year in the UK. Beyond that, big question, will the methodologies and the common standards be put in legislation? And I think there's a strong case for that. Second thing that you asked was, will we align with Europe? Would we have the same methodologies there? Again, I think there's a big question for the UK about the EU relationship, alignment with the EU on a whole range of things, including the methodologies that we're talking about today. So that's an open question. I would say it makes sense to have alignment with Europe, given that we have an industry that in many respects works across Europe in terms of supply chains, and that just makes life easier if we work to the same standards.
It would seem so. Thank you very much. Now, as in every episode, we invite students from schools around the world to ask questions to our guest speakers. We know the importance of inspiring sustainability and involving younger generations in the debate. And we have students from Braes High School in Scotland. Let's see what questions they have for you.
Hi, my name is Iona Lang and I am a student at Braes High School in Scotland. I have a question for you. Compared to other countries, how well do you think the UK is doing when it comes to sustainable food and drink value chains?
Another fantastic question from Braes High School. Compared to other countries, how well is the UK doing when it comes to having sustainable food and drink value chains or webs? Let's see, who'd like to go first on that? Jason.
How well is the UK doing? Okay, well, there's plenty of work happening across Europe. You've got, if you look at the farm to fork strategy, there is a huge amount of momentum around connecting up value chains to ensure that sustainability more broadly, and particularly this topic of net zero and scope 3 can be tackled. I think one of the major challenges, and we've already discussed it, but major challenges here is the rules of the game. If we don't have standardized rule sets, then everything else is secondary. We have to have comparability. We have to be able to enable competition. And I think the UK, to my knowledge at least, is certainly one of the leading examples of what action is happening across industry to establish that. And to David's point, it's a partnership between industry and government. These two things have to work in tandem. And yeah, very proud of what we're doing here in the UK to support the agenda.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to give Lucinda and David the opportunity to come up with a few remarks for Braes. If you've got anything to say, Lucinda, do you want to come in?
Well, I mean, obviously, I would say that some of the work that we're doing at M&S is industry leading, and we have some great farmers who have leading environmental standards and carbon reducing standards that we are very proud of. I think the issue, though, is some of the work they're doing, and again, to Jason's point, that the measurement, the metrics, they're not all consistent at the moment. Farmers can go measure different things in different ways, and I think are crying out for some guidance and some rule set around this that government, I think, could produce. So I think Yeah, I think that's probably my big call out would be, we need that the farmers need better clarity in order to be able to go further and faster. But generally, we work with lots of enthusiastic farmers who are dying to produce sustainable food. The question is how they measure it and how they tell us what they're doing. So that's mine.
Thank you. David, brief response from you, please, for Brays High School.
Very, very briefly, Lucy. So we're really good on ambition. We're really good on partnership working. Where we're ahead, and whatever you think about Brexit, whether you were for or against it, that freed us from the common agricultural policy. We are at the cutting edge in the UK, and particularly in England, within the UK, of farming reforms. The full focus of farming policy now is productivity and improving the environment, and that's not the case in Europe. So let's finish on a positive. We're ahead there. Still a long way to go.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for speaking with me today. It's really great to see industry and government working together to accelerate the net zero agenda. And as I say, I think there's so much that we can take from your insight and so much that other industries could learn as well. Many, many lessons there. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We now have some more inspirational stories to share with you, and we'll return in a minute.
In support of climate action, Soprasteria, a leader in European digital services, has targeted at least 10% of energy consumption reduction in its offices by end of 2023 from 2021 baseline. It's a great opportunity to accelerate our environmental program driven by our proactive employee engagement. And I'm very pleased to say that we are likely to exceed our targets, which should be brilliant news for everyone connected with Soprasteria. It's a small contribution to save our planet.
We've now reached the end of our third episode of this Be a Net Zero Hero podcast. I'd like to thank every one of you for listening and following this great conversation. It's fair to say that the food and drink sector offers major opportunities to drive net zero progress, and it's truly encouraging to see agri-food value chains collaborating to decarbonise while informing policy intervention. Now, please remember that you can follow these conversations on Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon Music. In our next episode, we will be talking about sustainable fashion. So stay tuned to listen to our fantastic guests from this sector. We hope to see you there, and thanks again for your time.